All right, I think we're good. Let's get this going. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Everybody still awake? Pretty quiet. Let's outdo the Dutch. I know David said the Dutch are pretty quiet, so I'm hoping for a little bit more energy in the room. Last time I did this, it was at night, and I'm pretty sure people were falling asleep. So let's hope for something better. It is Saturday. It's pretty early, so. So my name's Allan Ritchie. For those that don't know me, I am a former Microsoft and Xamarin MVP. Sorry. Yeah, he gets on my case all the time, so I'm gonna fix that though.
Yeah, you're gonna beat him.
All right. Anybody? I've written a ton of open source. You may be using it. If so, I'm sorry. Organize it later. Let me finish my presentation first. I've been doing .NET since betas of 1.0, so that's like 20 years. I don't look that old. I'm still sexy young, I think, but I do lots of Azure. I have to say that, right? You have to say that if you're a .NET developer. You have to say you do Azure. So I do Azure. Lots of links. I'll share them at the end. But I'm here all day if you want to ask lots of questions. So we're going to be talking about building cross-platform libraries with Xamarin. I'm not going to do anything super advanced. So if you're hoping for something like we're gonna do some Bluetooth or anything like that, that might take several hours. So we're not going to go into that. It'll be pretty simple. I'll talk about some of the ins and outs with some of the platforms because not all are created equal, despite popular opinions. I'm sure David can share his experiences with forms, UWP. And I'll talk about the different ways to write them. So there's an old classic model is what I'll call it. Called multi-library, I guess is the best way to refer it. And then we'll go into kind of the newer model, which is called multi-targeting. And I'll share the ins and outs with both of those. So you kind of get a sense of what's going on by the end of this, hopefully. So the first thing is we're gonna pick our platform. We're gonna decide on our platforms and what to watch out for. We're gonna do some code, and at the end I'll do all the Q&A with some links. So how to get started? First thing is obviously pick your platforms. For the most part, you'll see iOS and Android pretty much in every plugin. Anybody using plugins out there? Anybody? Yeah. Good, bad, ugly? Very good. So when you're starting to write these cross-platform libraries, I always tell people start with a single interface. Figure out what it is you want to do, why you want to do it, and start to frame it out. But as you go through this, I usually tell people start with iOS. Figure out what iOS is going to do for you because it's going to be the most limited experience. But everything in iOS is generally going to work. And then as you frame things out, you may want to go further into Android. And Android's going to have a humongous API surface to work with. So you have to kind of pick your battles there a bit. Once you know the lay of the land, so to speak, between whatever platforms you're going to hit, be prepared to what I call even the playing field. So iOS will do pretty much everything for you. It's probably the best in this area. But Android is going to make you work, and it always makes you work. Anybody like pro Android? Android rules the world. Okay, I won't be asking you questions. And then decide on your structure. If you want to go multi-library, it works everywhere. Multi-targeting still has its rough edges. So I'm not going to do all PowerPoint. I know everybody loves PowerPoint, right? Let's end this. And I'm going to work here. Is that big enough for everybody? Everybody can see that? Okay. So the first structure I'm going to show is kind of the classic look. Now I know this guy's a little small, but this is the classic project. Is anybody familiar with plugins in the structure? Or is this all brand new? All right. So the way it starts is there's always an abstraction. So this is where your interface lives and breathes. So we'll start with that guy. Let's get him going. And we'll call this, I don't know, what's it called? iEnvironment. That sounds good. So we're going to turn this into an interface. Air! Yay! So here's where we're going to start. This is going to be our opening interface. This is where we're going to start to aim for the stars, so to speak. We're going to define here what we want this bloody thing to do.
So did you start with a brand new Xamarin Forms project, like, or
We'll
is
get
it,
to that. There's no forms yet. Right now
how did you
we're.
start? Like, what is this template that you use?
So there's no template here. This is
Okay.
right now what we're looking at. This first abstractions library. So I'm in this guy right here.
Okay.
This is nothing more than a .NET Standard project. So here we're defining what we want this thing to do. Nothing special to it. So we're just going to call. Let's make it. What do you think? String operating system. That seems pretty easy. And we'll just do nothing but a getter. Because again, we're not going to do anything super complex today. We're just going to kind of roll with the motions of how Xamarin picks these things up. So now we've got our cool interface. It's going to solve world peace and stuff for us. But let's start to figure out how we do this. So here is a Xamarin Forms app. This is just the default template. Sorry for those who can't see this. It's running in parallel, so it's a little bit small. But here's just a standard template, nothing special to it. Now, normally this would come in a Nougat package. It would be all packaged up for you nicely. You install a Nougat package and magically this thing shows up. But we're going to show how we go from the start. So anybody familiar with some of the plugins? We always start with cross plugin.current. Has anybody seen that pattern? Anybody had not seen that pattern? Probably a better question. So when we see this cross-platform, I'm going to show it here. So I'm going to go into a shared project. So you've got this cross-environment thing. Okay, and this is a static class. This is generally what I refer to as the bootloader, the bootstrap, whatever it's going to. This is going to get everything spinning, so you can use it in your shared project or your shared code with Xamarin Forms. So we're just going to define our interface. And we're going to call this current. Okay, and we're going to make this a getter.
So you're not using .NET Standard, you're using shared class library.
So I'm using a shared class library here, and I'll explain that in a second. So this is a shared class or shared class library. Again, this is the classic form. You'll notice that there's quite a few projects here to define what this plugin is. I wanted to do it the hard way before I show you the easy way.
Okay.
So we're going to have an instance. Now this isn't going to work just yet. I'm going to return current. Come on. Oh, static. All right. So right now this doesn't look like much. What we're basically doing is we're going to have some magic class called environment implementation come into effect in a minute. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start with one of our platforms. So let's start with iOS. Okay, so we've got this nice little class here. We're going to call this environment implementation. Okay, and take care of that. Now one thing is, notice my namespaces are beginning to line up. So everything is starting with my plugin. It's not myplugin.ios, it's just my plugin. That's the first. There's a bit of witchcraft involved in this, so this is the first one to pay attention to. So we're going to call this the environment implementation. And we're going to go ahead and implement our interface. And obviously we're going to be on iOS. And just to show what we're looking at here, so this is the iOS plugin. You'll see I'm referencing two things. I'm referencing the abstractions library. Where are we here? Right there. And I'm referencing our shared project. Okay? You're going to see that's the commonality between all of the plugins as we go through this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this guy over. I'm going to steal him. And I'm going to put him in, let's put him in the Droid project. And obviously now this is Android. And put them in UWP. I have to ask the question, how many people are actually doing UWP in here? I take this as a poll. Really? Okay, one. Anybody else? Anybody else brave enough to put up their hand? No one? Good for you, man. Okay, so that's great. I asked because people often come out of nowhere saying, when are you going to support UWP? And I was like, who does it? Who's doing it anymore? I don't know.
Actually, like IBM was looking for UWP developers
Yeah.
recently, like a month or two ago. I was like, I use Xamarin Forms. They're like, Xamarin Forms with UWP. I was like, I don't have, no one uses UWP.
I've done 2 apps in UWP. I always seem to do the plugins with UWP because people come at me all the time, and I'm like, where are these apps? They're not in the store. Or they are, and I just can't find them. I don't know. All right, so now we've got our three environment variables. Now, one thing to note is, okay, I'm referencing this guy. So this is we're now looking at our Xamarin Forms shared project. There's nothing special about this. So I'm going to hide our plugins for a second. Hide all of that. I'm going to open up our main page. I'm not known for my UI. This is about as sexy as it gets. We have a label centered. It's beautiful. That's great UI. Just shove it in a stack. And I always have a good UI designer or UX guy that deals with it. Matt, where's Matt? Matt, there he is. Yeah, right on, buddy. You take care of me. So we're going to go ahead. Now we've got our abstractions and our plugin. Okay. Now most of the time you're doing this with Nougat packages, so you would see this just as a straight Nougat. For debugging purposes, I have to bring in both of these. So let's go ahead. So hopefully I have that label. What do I call it? My label? My label. My label. Dot text. Cross environment. Dot. I haven't compiled this yet, but it's actually going to fail. We'll talk about that in just a sec. Good. So notice it's saying, okay, well, I haven't. There we go. Then it'll be happy. Okay, so we've got our interface. Visual Studio's, of course, erring on me a little bit there. It's a normal day, right? So this still won't compile, or it shouldn't, because there's one thing missing. It is compiled, right? Okay, so let's go back to that shared project, because this is where everything gets rolling in the bootloader. So I'm going to pull this guy out. So notice there's actually, when we look at the Xamarin Forms project, you think there's 3 platforms. There's kind of, let's say 3.5, 4. There's one other library. He's way at the top. It says XamSat. That's actually .NET Standard. That's our shared code running. That's where we're doing all of our dev for the most part. So I've said this environment implementation exists everywhere except in .NET Standard, because .NET Standard doesn't know about iOS. It doesn't know about Android. So we have to make it aware. What we're doing is something called the bait and switch technique. So I'm going to go ahead. So here's our plugin in .NET Standard. Everybody see that still? I know it's small in Visual Studio World, but this guy has nothing in him. Okay, this is called the bait. So when we reference this, we basically have to say it can't do anything. Let's go ahead and create him as an environment implementation. And implement this guy. Now normally I would just allow this to be an exception, but the fact is we don't even need this class, and we probably shouldn't have it. And the reason is because it can't do anything. So I'm going to comment that out. I'm going to go back to our cross environment. Now again, why this is in a shared project? So with .NET Standard, you don't get any compiler flags or pre-processing flags. What that is a way to say if def. Everybody's doing if defs, right? Anybody C++? No? Nobody's doing C++? No, great language. So you can if def in a shared project to say, if this is, come on. If this is .NET Standard, we'll get to what .NET Standard should do in a second. So I'm saying for every other library, so this line now says any other version is going to have an environment implementation, right? So iOS, UWP, and Android will have this. But for .NET Standard, because it's a bait, it doesn't do anything, we're going to actually throw an exception because it means you've done something wrong. You shouldn't be here. Okay? So what this is doing is allowing our bootloader to reference everything. Because notice that this wasn't referencing before. And now it is. Okay? Because it still sees that cross environment is there. There should be an interface. But now what's going to happen when we hit our static for the first time is it's going to go, oh, it's current. Well, hang on, let's do this properly though. If current is null, let's go ahead and set it. Right? So we're going to new it up. And now when we access it, it should give us the equivalent of whatever platform is running. So we've got, let's go back to, let's do Android, or let's do iOS because that's the easiest to run. So we're going to go ahead and change this to an emulator because I think my phone's in my bag. We'll give that a second. It's its first compile of the day. So we should see on this big, beautiful screen, nothing but iOS come up. Right dead center of the screen. And if it doesn't, and it crashes, well, we'll figure that out. Come on. Beautiful. So it magically somehow figured out that it needed to get the iOS version of this implementation. So what the term bait and switch means is it's always looking at our .NET standard because we're in a .NET standard library. This guy right here, our main Xamarin Forms project. So it doesn't know how to get to iOS. So what the compiler does is it says, okay, I see you referenced my plugin or our .NET standard version. What it's going to do is the compiler is going to see, also notice I've referenced the my plugin iOS. But that's not enough because it still needs to figure out, well, how do I get that proper library there? So this is where the witchcraft comes in. One of the things that it does, the compiler does, is the head project or the iOS project in this case is going to say, give me the last reference that I have of the same DLL name. So when we go through this project, so this guy's obviously named my plugin. Okay, nothing special to it. But if we look at the actual iOS project name, you'll notice the assembly name is also my plugin. Okay, the namespace is my plugin. So this is where the bit of witchcraft comes in. So it saw our .NET standard library, grabbed this guy, but our iOS version grabbed the iOS version and actually overwrote the DLL that was there. So there's a bit of witchcraft involved there. And the Android will do the same thing, and the UWP will do the same thing. It will override the bait with the switch, or the actual platform code. So if we look at that again, let's go to our Droid. You'll see Droid has the same name, same assembly name, same namespace. And UWP as well. Any questions about that so far? There's a bit of witchcraft involved, like I said. And there's a lot of libraries involved.
Is that actual expected behavior?
Yep. It's basically, because I've referenced in the iOS project, let me pull that back up. It's going to grab this instance last. It doesn't care. Like, this is the last in the chain to get compiled is the iOS project, because that's what I'm running. So it doesn't care that my plugin.dll already exists. It's just going to overwrite it with that myplugin.dll. And then magically, that's how the switch happens. It happens at compile time, and it's a bit whimsical. Again, you have to do that witchcraft of naming everything the same. And if you don't, that's when things begin to go a little insane on you. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's rename this library back. Let's call it iOS. Might have to clean it so that it doesn't grab the previous version. And we'll rebuild.
Is there a reason you don't use Visual Studio for Mac?
Let's save that question for later.
Okay.
Yes, but when I get to the multi-targeting, which is the better version of this, the modern version of this, absolutely yes. I'll cover that in a few minutes.
It's like, you have a Mac.
You've used VS for Mac. I can't trash it too much, but In the back of my mind, read my mind. Okay, so we've got to compile. Everything has its bugs. Which one did I have? Let's try this one. So now I'm expecting this to crash because it's going to find the .NET Standard version because it's not overwriting the DLL because I renamed it to iOS. At least I'm hoping it crashes. How many times do you wish for it to crash, right? There we go. Beautiful. Because it's not being overwritten anymore. So it doesn't see, it sees the .NET Standard version of our library, which is bad because that's not what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and name this back. Put this back to what it was. So that covers our bait and switch, but really, what is the advantage to doing that? You could do dependency injection. Anybody doing dependency injection in their Forms app? Yeah? Fantastic, you guys are great. Do dependency injection if you're writing big apps. That's opinionated, but do it anyways. Let's see. We've got that. So when we start to look at this, obviously we don't want this to just say iOS. It's obviously iOS. But I may want to reference stuff like UIKit. Right? So I'm in my iOS project. This is just nothing more than an iOS class library. So now I can start to do stuff like UI device, what do they call it? Current device dot. Let's find a property that's good. Come on, give me something. The name. Why not? So now we've restored this. Now we'll see what name says. I don't even know what it's going to say. Okay, there we go. So now we're actually going to see what UI kit's going to run for us. I don't even know what name returns. Anybody know? This we'll know in a second. Is it going to return iPhone? iPhone XR. Beautiful. That's not the operating system, but now you get the sense of what's going on. Because it's actually, we're able to write pure iOS code now in this library. And as we build out our interface, we're able to do stuff like, let's see, where's my interface here? We could do stuff like, what is that, string device name, and pull that out, whatever the equivalent is in Android and UWP, iOS. We can now start to pull all those variables out with very minimal effort. Now, while I've shown this classic model, this model kind of sucks. And the reason it kind of sucks is because, one, there's a whole lot of libraries, and there's quite a bit of witchcraft going on. If you didn't know to rename your libraries, you'd be pulling your hair out, trying to figure out why it's not running your platform code. So when Microsoft did .NET Standard 2, they released this wonderful, wonderful kind of tech called multitargeting. So I'm going to open just a .NET Standard class library, and I'm going to build on that. So let's find this guy. I'm going to call him my better plugin. Now this time, what I'm going to do is it's going to be one library. So here we saw, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 libraries to get one plugin. And this time, I'm going to have one library that serves all platforms, or as many as I want to anyways. So let's bring over our, hang on, let me close all those guys. And we're going to start with the interface again. What do we call this guy? Let's call him an iEnvironment 2 just to really screw ourselves up. And we'll make our interface. I guess I could have copied and pasted this, but the namespace has to be different. So we'll do operating system here as well. Make that a getter. Now, the one thing here with this guy is right now we're looking at target framework. We're looking at a very basic .NET Standard project. What if I add an S? It likes it. It likes it. This is where things begin to get cool. Visual Studio doesn't like it right now. It's quite angry with me. The thing with some of these libraries is the tooling gets a little bit wonky here to start. It's all right. It'll figure itself out. If not, when all else fails, what does everybody do? Restart VS. So we're going to go ahead and bring out Xamarin iOS 1.0. We'll start there. So now, if Visual Studio figures itself out, which it's not going to, we're going to bring out all of our plugins, or all of the environments we want. So one thing you saw me do before is I had Android. I just had a standard Android library that was targeting probably the latest, 9.0. That doesn't mean that we're stuck to 9.0. It's just your major target should be 9.0. But some people are still in 8.1. Some people are still in 7.0. Anybody have a classic Android app that they're writing in Xamarin that's maybe down a few platforms? No one? What are you at still, out of curiosity? What version of, what's your major target if you're down a few notches on Android? 7?
I believe it's like 8 lately.
Okay.
Get down to
7, 7.1, 8, 8.19 is basically what we're at now. So with the classic technique, you can really only target one with ease. So this is set at 9.0. So it means your project in Nougat has to be 9.0 as well if you want to reference the Android project. So with this one, that's not always the case. You might have some legacy. You might not be able to upgrade the project. Who knows? In this case, I can now target Mono Android 8.1 and 9. So now I don't need to worry about it. Somebody going, hey, your plugin doesn't work. Well, no, just bump up your target. Change your target. No big deal. And we'll also add UWP for the 2 people that did it. Now for UWP, there's a little bit of a whimsical number here. This 16299 is about a year old. It's a specific version when they started supporting .NET Standard properly. So it's just a number that has to exist. We'll just deal with it for now. Okay, so we've got our targets. I'm going to restart Visual Studio.
UAP or is it UWP?
UAP.
Okay.
At some point, they decided that it was going to be called Universal Application Platform. I feel as though that goal may not have made it. So we're going to go ahead and load this up. I'm going to give Visual Studio a little bit of help. Hopefully this time it doesn't give me the yellow stickies of doom. Give it a second, and magically you're going to see something here in a second that goes on with also another error. Ah, Visual Studio, you're letting me down. Okay, we're going to do a couple things here.
Can you share some of this code once you're done?
This will all be up on some GitHub repo for today. I have no idea where it is yet, but it's out there. Okay, so I have an actual good library over here, so I'm going to copy a bunch of stuff. I'll show it just. So there's a lot of stuff in this file now, but I'm going to talk about the rest of it in a second. So with the multi-targeting, there's so many tool sets we actually get now. We get something called SourceLink, which allows you to debug NuGet packages. I don't know if you've ever been swearing at a NuGet package and wish, hey, I wish I could debug it. So there's SourceLink and stuff, which I plugged in at the top. I won't talk too much about that. But now you can begin to see how we frame in these platforms. So now you see if target framework starts with Net Standard, include something that looks like a shared folder. If it starts with Mono Android, include some Mono Android platform and shared, and maybe even include some NuGet packages that are only relevant to Android. And same, there's that UAP thing doing whatever it does. And lastly, iOS. So I'm going to bring these guys over. Or I could just show this one. You know what? We don't need to copy it all. So the one thing I did change is because .NET, this whole multi-targeting is rather new, is there's a NuGet package out there that kind of helps frame in all the missing pieces. So it's just at the top there. This is a NuGet package that helps fill in gaps like, I don't know, has anybody ever opened an Android project and looked at the massive amount of XML in it? Anybody brave enough to do it? Same for iOS. iOS has this big gigantic set of XML that comes in it. So that little guy up there does all that work for me for the most part. And then all I do is I override what I want it to do. So up there I've got my target frameworks again. I've got some assemblies, so I know what I'm naming it. And magically this guy will also work. So the difference here is, if we look at the structure of this, is I've got this platforms folder now. So this is almost the equivalent of the projects we had before, except it's all in one folder. So we've got our Android, our iOS, our shared, and our UWP. So what's in shared? We saw before. It's actually the same guy. The difference here is, if I go back to the other project, let's go back to this guy that's in error. I can't really tell what I can see what it's sharing or where it's referenced, but I can't tell what platforms they are unless I name these well. If I go over here, this guy's telling me what it supports. So that drop-down says, okay, well, you've referenced Monodroid 8.1, 9.0, Net Standard 2, 16.299, whatever that UAP thing is again, and iOS. Now, right now, I've got Net Standard, so it's highlighting the Net Standard version. If I change this over to any of the other ones, it's flipped the switch for me. So now I can see, hey, this is the code that's going to run for that environment. Same for iOS, UWP, all that stuff. So now we know that this code should be what runs for that environment. So let's look at this library. I had two projects, so I made sure one would work and compile, because you never know, the demo gods can strike down at any time. So here in this project, this is our classic version of our environment plugin, and this is our multi-targeted version. So I'm going to run this, not on my phone, on this guy. And we'll see what our iOS version of this was running. So better iOS, what did it not like? That's always a good start. Let's recompile. So we should see iOS and better iOS. Come on. Okay. It's going to run this time, right? Don't curse me today. There we go. There we have it. So we have our classic still returning iOS, but now we have the better iOS version. And we did that with one library this time. So everything is magically in there. Now one of the things is sometimes people like to add platforms as they go. So you may want to add watchOS. Anybody doing watchOS? I have to ask the question too, because nobody's going to put tvOS, macOS. Come on, there's got to be Mac people. Really? Okay. I'm not doing those plugins then. No requests for that. Nobody's doing it. I now know I have a statistic. Okay? So we have our better iOS, but let's say we want this to work on watchOS, even though nobody's doing it. So before in the shared project, I was able to do stuff like if-def, meaning if it's this platform, do this, but I was only able to do that in a shared project. I can't do that really up in our plugin code. Like I can't do that here. It's because it's not going to matter. It's not going to run that pre-compiler step here. But when I get up into this world, there's a whole whack of cool stuff I can do. So I can say if watchOS, else it's probably going to be iOS. I hope that's the right compiler variable, but we'll find out. Okay. And I'm going to open this project one more time. So I haven't added watchOS yet. I'm going to go ahead and tack it in here. I'm not sure what this is going to do. We'll see if it errors. If not, I'll pick a different platform. Okay. Now, one of the things is that you'll see I'm using this double star. Okay. I'm not compiling, so I'm not sure why that's coming up. But this double star is a technique called globbing. So it's basically going to say anything under my UWP folder in this case, grab it all. It's all going to compile if it's a CS file. Give it to me. But I want to actually add watchOS to this. So now I can say, let's do this. Let's go ahead and say if it's watchOS, I think I've added it, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, I want a watchOS folder. But I don't want to rewrite this twice, because chances are UIKit actually happens to exist in both platforms. So I don't want to have a watchOS folder as well, because they're probably going to run the same line of code. So let's do some more wildness. Let's say any folder that looks like watchOS. We're going to add here any folder that looks like iOS. Right? So we're wildcarding it. Anything that looks like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this folder name to iOS. Come on. Plus watchOS. So hopefully Visual Studio figures everything out nicely, and voila. So now, just through the magic of your standard CLI where you're saying, give me all those folders, it's now saying, hey, I know what to do with watchOS and iOS in the same folder, which is pretty cool. Because now it's much easier to share the code. I'm able to do stuff. So if I wanted to say return, hang on, let me get this right. And we'll do watchOS. Right? And if I change this, hopefully I got the right variable. I did not. There we go. So now it's flipping the switch for me because it knows that this folder's got both watchOS and iOS. And what's really cool here is because I happen to, well, I hope I'm right, UIKit does indeed exist in both. So now I'm going to get rid of this flag. And I'm going to go back to UI device.current. Let's just do model again. Nobody minds, right? Okay, so it doesn't like something here. Now this is even better because it's saying, well, first of all, I'm wrong. So watchOS does not exist. It's not available. UIKit does not exist in watchOS, right? So it's telling me that right out of the gate. It says I'm good if I do this in iOS. That's great. Now I know I'm already failing my code design here. So now we'll go back to this. What platform does have UIKit? It's probably tvOS. But anyhow, you kind of get the point of what I'm doing here. So, and I can change this. I can do if-defs in my namespaces. I can do them down here. We'll just rewind this to watchOS. I'm going to copy this version. And we're going to say watchOS. We're going to go else, because we know this works in iOS land. And if we're going to reference it, this still won't compile because this namespace doesn't exist in watchOS. So I'm just going to bring it down here. UIKit dot. Okay, so now this should be happy with both watchOS and iOS. Let's go ahead and change this. Come on. There we go. Now it's not complaining. No red squigglies of compiler doom. And that's it. We're able to do some magic. Now this normally wouldn't be a good practice. Normally I wouldn't do this, but there are lots of overlap as you look at tvOS, macOS, iOS. There's lots of API surface overlap. It's kind of a bit of a maze or a large Excel spreadsheet to figure out where those intersection points are, but this helps you get there. You can actually do your Excel spreadsheet right here and figure out what your API surface is and what the overlap is. Question?
Yeah, so in the second line of code there, you're using the fully qualified namespace for it. Would you recommend doing it that way or putting your compiler statements up in the using statements if you had several using statements for iOS versus watchOS?
If you're going to probably use that namespace over and over again, I would probably put it up here, which you can still do. You can do it up here if you want. So if iOS will say bring out UIKit, And now it's telling me, look, I can get rid of it down here. Right, so it's just a nice clean way of doing it. So if I still need to do if-defs, I can do them all. I am going to be I would probably be referencing UI device several times. So I probably would put the namespace like I did here. It's just hard to say. Pick your poison, so to speak.
Is there like a tipping point where you would recommend putting them at? I know it's a style preference, but 'cause I've done a couple of classes like this where we've had a couple of different statements of if else on the different platforms, and it gets a little verbose and confusing quickly.
If you're going to get to that stage, usually what I do is, notice that I've shoved these both under one platform. What I may do is I'll say, okay, if I'm going to do lots of if-defs, I may do the intersection points here, a few if-defs, but I'll bring back my iOS folder and I'll say, no, just do iOS here. Okay. And then that way there's separation. Because that's the best thing about multi-target is I can decide which route I want to go. Do I want to put everything under one folder and make it all pretty? Or do I want to start doing if-defs and make my code a little bit spaghetti-ish, right? But in some cases, you need a little bit of both, right? Sometimes you need a folder, sometimes you need if-def. And this project structure allows you to do both at will. So that's some of the magic. Any questions? Great.
So when you're compiling, does it compile for every target framework?
Yep, it'll compile several times. It does get a little slow because now, before you might have said don't compile like Droid, for example, right? This guy is going to compile all of them. There's a whole ton of magic, but if you're interested, I can talk about that after and show you how we can kind of narrow it down so it only compiles a few things. But that's a whole other topic that we won't get into today.
The definition names for each target, are they preset or have you set them somewhere in your project structure there?
Sorry, the definition?
The actual for each platform there, so you got _watchOS. Is that something that you defined or is that defined by the platform?
That's defined by the platform. So the question is, these compiler variables that I'm pulling out there, the if-defs,
yeah,
they're all actually done by Xamarin, 90% of them anyways. You can still define your own. So if I go back into this project structure, let's say I didn't, now I've worked with these a few times so I know about the underscores. But let's say I didn't know about it. So I've got this, let's go to iOS. I don't like its version of, I don't know why I have to do that. I could define a constant here and call it, we'll bring out all the other constants because otherwise you'll anger it. And I could say iOS. I just want it like that. And now iOS will work, right? Because again, it's only in the iOS project that it's going to do this. Right. Any other questions before I move on? All right, so now we're going to go back to our PowerPoint. Play from current slide. So some of the challenges with this, I'm going to go over the challenges by the platform and challenges by picking your target. So multi-library is going to compile everywhere for you. You're not going to have any issues with it. It's just projects keep growing. Additional tooling such as SourceLink, like I said, that's the debugging. And Nougat packaging, they're quite a bit more manual. It's more of a manual process and you have to go through it. And obviously we saw a little bit of witchcraft. Again, this code will be up so you can see it. But when we switch to multi-targeting, the only downfall really from it is that right now it does not compile well in VS for Mac. Ooh. There's a Microsoft guy here somewhere that you can really ride about that. It's really frustrating. It's coming. It's almost there. So eventually this will compile. Everything except for UAP, obviously. And I can show some ways in how we say, okay, well, if we're on Mac, it'll compile UAP. But again, we could talk about that after, offline. And there's not a lot of witchcraft involved. Like, it's all in one file. You can see what it's doing. There's not really any, I don't want to say there's not really any real complexities that you have to go hunting for. It's all in that CS proj. So if you're asking me today what the better choice is, just do multi-targeting. And help us fight the fight to get it into VS for Mac.
So does Shiny use multi-target?
We'll get to that. Okay. Yes, I do, quite a bit. Okay. So the platforms you're going to use, obviously there's a lot of stuff out there. There's your iOS, there's Uno, which is doing a bunch of things, Tizen, WebAssembly, I don't know, what's this guy? That's Mac OS, Windows. There's so many places to multi-target. And as you do this, you know, the goal of Xamarin and Microsoft right now is to write your .NET code once and feel it everywhere, feed it everywhere. So you can start picking your poisons. A lot of the times I'm hitting iOS, Windows, Mac OS is coming, Tizen. So you have to start doing these things. We have to get ready for this. So multi-targeting helps us get there. So as we talk about the platforms, I want to kind of share my experiences in setting these guys up. Now I'm only going to talk about the big three, which is iOS, Android, and UWP. I call UWP big, but there's still only 2 of us in the room. So iOS, this API will handle everything for you. And what I mean by that is if I register something like a geofence, I don't have to magically guess or restore that geofence later. iOS will manage it from now until I tell it not to. It will work without issue. You won't find bugs. iOS is like the iron horse. It will just work. Unless somebody wants to throw something at me to say otherwise, we'll have a balance of bulls. iOS is the beast. What's that? Somebody wants to take a shot? No, I didn't think so. I'm getting to Android. Android is a different experience. The docs and Stack Overflow, the answers will be great. They'll be up to date. You won't have a problem getting an answer to your question. The bad is iOS will have the smallest API surface. And that's because they're so big on their privacy. You have to do what you need to do, but not a step more. They won't give you a pinch more. If you intend to run these things in the background, don't go crazy. iOS is vicious about background processes. If you abuse them, it will abuse you back, but harder. It'll just shut down your app, and that'll be that. If the API starts with if you have something like UIKit, which I showed in that example, be prepared to hop on the UI thread even though you're not doing something with the UI. So for instance, I was pulling out the model name of the iOS device. If I wasn't on the main thread already, that would have been crashing. Why? I don't know what the thinking is. Maybe Apple thought it was a good idea. If it starts with UI, you should be on the UI thread. I can't answer that. I think it's a bit odd. In terms of what I called leveling the playing field here, you don't really have to do much in terms of cross-platform, but if you wanted, say, iOS to do something that it's not supposed to be or that it won't allow you to do, you might want to feature flag your way out. So basically say, my plugin does not support that because iOS. So be prepared to do that. Now, as we talk about Android I'm a bit biased towards. It really angers me. It will likely have the biggest API surface. It will do everything. That's not necessarily a good thing. The official docs are pretty good. But you notice I don't say Stack Overflow. And as we get to that, as we go into the bad, you will probably need external dependencies on their support libraries. But the reason Stack Overflow isn't good is because Google tends to deprecate APIs at will. Anybody experience that pain? Firebase, GCM, I can go on, but you will feel that pain. They will deprecate stuff on you like that. The next one's coming. If you're not prepared, anybody using support libraries? Anybody pure Android developers in here? Yeah? Android X?
We need to migrate to it.
That hurts, doesn't it? Yeah?
2015 project, so it hurts even more.
Yeah, it's painful, and it's pretty soon you're not going to have a choice. The other one, for those who have done Android likes its context objects. Context everywhere. You're passing an activity, you're passing application.context. What those instances are sometimes, who knows? But it's everywhere, so get used to it. There will be bugs. I know everybody, all the Android lovers in the room, and I know that's probably a good majority. The platform is a bit of a mess. Anybody working with Bluetooth in the audience? Nobody? Bluetooth is a horrible disaster of pain. It looks like an asynchronous API, and it should be asynchronous. No. If you start doing asynchronous stuff with Google, it will shut down on you. You won't know why. It just won't work. You might find something in the massive logs that Android generates, but good luck. It's painful. So when we talk about this, leveling the playing field, get prepared to deal with those bugs because you want it to work consistently. So if on iOS it's an asynchronous API and you're expecting it to be asynchronous, then you need to protect Android from itself. Because we as .NET developers, what's the one thing we like the most right now? Exactly, async and await. So you start doing async and await on Android and it doesn't do it properly, it's going to implode on you. And then what's going to happen if you do this on GitHub? People are going to be screaming rage at you. I know, I suffer from it pretty regularly. So be prepared for that. You need to protect Android from itself. The other thing is unlike iOS, if you register something like a geofence, Android won't remember it for you. It won't even give you an API to see what geofences are currently registered. It doesn't care. It thinks you registered them, you know about it. Why didn't you remember it? You registered it. Well, I'm lazy, clearly. Like, I don't want to, you do it for me. iOS does it, so you do it for me. So we tend to balance this out, so get prepared to do some sort of persistence layer to remember the geofences so it works consistently between your platforms. Questions on that, what I mean? Anybody? Nobody? And last but not least, UWP. What can I say about UWP? Yeah, the API surface is often pretty good on paper. It looks well, everything's asynchronous, it should be great. Setting up background is surprisingly easy on UWP. And debugging, you're in a Windows platform anyways. Well, those of you who use VS for Mac, you poor souls. Okay, fine, it doesn't work there. But on Windows, it actually works pretty darn good. The bad about UWP. This is a pretty small area I have, so I couldn't write a novel here. But if you're going to find something on Stack Overflow, good luck. It's not going to exist. These errors, because there's two of us in the room, I don't like our odds here in percentage of finding an answer to a problem. It's not going to be out there. Bluetooth is just, this is looking like a pretty good girder to hang myself from for UWP. And surprisingly, I don't know why they thought this was a good idea if they were rewriting it. You will see COM errors. What are we in the 1990s still? You will see COM errors come out of UWP. Who knew? I thought it was the new universal platform. It still uses COM underneath the hood. It's not going away. They just won't let that damn tech die, will they? And everything is async on UWP. Why? I don't know. Even stuff that shouldn't be async, such as getting the device model name, I didn't know that was an async process, but guess what? It is on UWP. No idea why. So with UWP, the only thing is often it will do a lot of this lifting, but when you're leveling the playing field on UWP, just be prepared. It often has the same relative limitations as Android, but it really depends. It really depends on the version of UWP you're using. Is there any questions? It's question time. I think I'm doing good on time too, right? This is 11:15?
Yeah, it's 11:15.
Wow, wicked. Questions? So there's a bunch of links up here. Like I said, I do a lot of open source. If you are interested in doing plugins, obviously there is a good infrastructure out there. Xamarin Essentials. Everybody using Xamarin Essentials? Everybody's using Essentials. Anybody heard of Shiny? Anybody using Shiny? Anybody want to throw knives at me? It's not done yet. It's in a beta. Give me a break. So it's up there too. And I will be doing some Shiny code kind of in this back. So I've got a free day to do code. I don't need to listen to what everybody's talking about because they've already shared their speech. So I'm actually going to be at the back of a room somewhere. So if you want to come see me writing some Shiny code, come take a look. But if there's no questions, yeah, there we go.
So I've wanted to create a plugin like quite a few times, just never have gotten to it. So and I only have a Mac. I don't have a Windows. Do you suggest I buy a Windows?
Do you care about UWP?
No.
All right, then no, I don't. Do you plan on doing open source with it?
Yes.
Okay, these people come out of the woodworks with UWP. I didn't even know they existed.
So it's something as simple as like Zendesk has this like new chat feature, Zendesk Chat.
Yeah.
Which was formerly called Zopin, and it's pretty popular. You know, people just do it on like mobile web because there's no Nougat package for Xamarin.
Okay.
And so it seems pretty straightforward and simple to actually implement a Nougat package for it.
Okay. You don't need it there, absolutely. One thing to keep in mind is I covered the big three, and I know UWP, there's two of us in the audience. One thing to keep in mind is .NET Core 3 is coming. I think it's next month. I think they announced it's coming next month. .NET Core 3 is really going to revitalize the community. There is a lot of code out there that exists in Windows Forms There's a lot of code that exists out there in WPF. Anybody doing Windows Forms that's brave enough to raise their hand? Wow, we got to. Yes. How about WPF? I suspect I'm going to have better luck with that. Okay, WPF 2. I actually do know there was one other UWP developer in here. You forgot to put up your hand, sir. I just remembered that. Still counts. Still counts. So WPF and Windows Forms are going to see a bit of a revitalization, not because we still want to write code in Windows Forms, but because we need to start getting out of Windows Forms, and we need to start getting out of WPF. Cross-platform plugins are a great way to get there, right? Because they're going to be looking, they're going to be like, hey, I've got this old cruddy Windows Forms app. I want to do Bluetooth with it. I don't know why, but now we can get there, right? We have a bridge to UWP, which does Bluetooth, right? So we're able to bring these old dinosaurs and kind of retrofit them with like bionic parts and say, hey, Windows Form app, that was when does Windows Forms come out? 2001? Now we're able to retrofit you to get to the next level, whether it's WebAssembly, do something exciting like Uno. Anybody heard of Uno? Yeah? All right. So now we've given them an avenue to modernize. So just because you don't do Windows and UWP doesn't mean this stuff isn't coming at us, and it's an exciting time to be a Xamarin / cross-platform developer in .NET, because this stuff is all still existing, and .NET 5 is going to be even cooler when that comes out. Any other questions? Do you want to hit me with anything? We're good on time? All right. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the talk.